A mochi moment from Mark, who writes, I just want to thank you for making GLP-1s affordable. What would have been over $1,000 a month is just $99 a month with Mochi. Money shouldn't be a barrier to healthy weight. 3 months in, and I have smaller jeans and a bigger wallet. You're the best. Thanks, Mark. I'm Myra Ahmed, founder of Mochi Health. To find your Mochi moment, visit joinmochi.com.
Mark is a Mochi member compensated for his story.
Homes.com has collaboration tools to help home shoppers search, share, and discuss home shopping with family, friends, and their agent directly through the site. Though it was fun to get that email from your husband about that 3-bedroom in the hills, to which you replied via text that you would never live in the hills and you'd like to find a 3-bedroom closer to the beach. To which he replied, why are you so uncompromising? A fun way to spend an afternoon, but we think it's just a tad bit easier our way. Homes.com. Ding dong. We've done your homework.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings,
and
Killer Communications.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
On June 5, 2006, police discovered the nude, significantly decomposed body of a supine woman. This was in a vacant home at 2646 Harding Street on the east side of Detroit, Michigan, where Detroit PD Sergeant Shannon Jones tells me it's not uncommon to find bodies who have been undiscovered for months or even years. An autopsy noted the following about the Jane Doe. She was black, she was between 20 and 30 years old, and she stood about 5 feet tall. She was slender and wore red toenail polish. Her cause of death was strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. The pathologist concluded that she'd been dead for at least a week. I don't know whether a sexual assault kit was administered. I was told that Jane Doe was very decomposed, so it's entirely possible that obtaining vaginal, oral, and anal swabs was not an option. However, samples were collected that would be tested to obtain Jane Doe's own STR DNA profile. In terms of physical characteristics that were potentially recognizable, Jane Doe was missing her right maxillary central incisor, a front tooth that would have been very noticeable. She still had some fingerprints that the medical examiner was able to lift, but they weren't of sufficient quality to be useful in identifying her. Clothing found draped and piled on Jane Doe's body or in close proximity to her and believed to be her own included a pair of no excuses blue jeans, size 9 to 10, a white bra, a winter weight short jacket with navy and white trim and nautical flags, Nike sneakers, and a red t-shirt reading Walter Mabry, Executive Secretary, Treasurer, and a dog logo. A police canvass of the neighborhood yielded no helpful leads. One neighbor reported hearing screams in the night about 3 weeks earlier, but there was no way to know whether that was related, as it was a little bit outside the time frame provided by the medical examiner for Jane Doe's death. When Jane Doe remained unidentified, she was buried in a pauper's grave maintained by the county. But even though investigators didn't know who she was, they quickly learned who killed her. About 6 weeks after Jane Doe was found in the vacant house, a 45-year-old sex worker was viciously attacked. On July 26, 2006, the woman met a John known to her in an abandoned garage. She bartered with him to trade oral sex for a $5 rock of crack. They had sex and smoked the crack. Then they moved to an abandoned house near Hickory and Lyndhurst, where they smoked some more crack. Then, unprovoked, the man threw her down, started choking her, struck her with a brick several times on the forehead, stripped her, sexually assaulted her, and then left her there. The woman was able to stagger out half naked and get help. She was taken to a hospital where she went into a coma and had to have a transfusion. When she emerged from the coma, she was able to describe the man who attacked her. He was black, unusually tall, and went by the street name E. Detroit police immediately knew that this guy E's MO fit that of a potential serial killer who had been preying on East Side Detroit women since 1999. They had started noticing a pattern in 2002 with very similar victimology and MO. They went on a major offensive to identify and arrest this man, E. According to the Detroit Free Press, every patrol officer was ordered to be on the lookout for a very tall, strong, mid-30s black male. They spread out and canvassed street corner drug dealers, sex workers, and neighborhood mom-and-pop shop owners. And finally, the blanket effort paid off because, as one officer said, even drug dealers don't like rapists. A tipster called police on a cell phone saying this E was entering an abandoned building in the 13,400 block of Grenier. Police swooped in and arrested E, who was really Shelly Andre Brooks. On July 30th, they booked him on assault charges, and the survivor he had put into a coma was able to identify him in a lineup as her assailant, since she knew him after about a month and a half of transactional interactions that had ended in her assault. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The survivor was very lucky to be alive. As soon as Brooks's DNA was collected and run through the state and federal DNA databases, the investigators confirmed that his DNA was associated with an unsolved homicide. His DNA linked him to the 2002 slaying of 33-year-old Pamela Greer. On January 22, 2002, Pamela's body was found by an asbestos removal worker in an abandoned structure at 9700 St. Paul in Detroit. She had been repeatedly struck on the head with a hard object and left to die. A stray dog had consumed some of her right leg. DNA collected from her body came back to Shelly Andre Brooks. The connection between Pam Greer and Brooks started a landslide of murders being pinned on Brooks. Pam had been found in the same building as that of another deceased woman. In August of 2001, the body of Sandra Davis, age 53, was discovered. She, too, had been bludgeoned and stuffed in a closet. There were more. This information is from court documents reviewed by me and a 2007 AssociatedContent.com article by Jean Marie Kearns. The body of Marion Woods Daniels, age 36, was found April 14, 2002, in an alley at 4904 Crane Street. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head from blows from a brick. On April 22, 2002, the body of Rhonda Miles, age 45, was found in a vacant building located at 1382 Manistique. Rhonda had been beaten to death with a wooden chair leg. The body of 30-year-old Thelma Johnson was found by a pedestrian on November 5, 2002, in a vacant lot at Mack and Holcomb. Thelma had also been beaten to death. On October 18, 2005, the body of Melissa Toston, age 38, was found in a vacant garage located between Chalmers Street and Flanders Street. Melissa had been beaten to death with a piece of concrete. And of course, on June 5, 2006, our Jane Doe was found, strangled and bludgeoned, in a vacant building at 2646 Harding. So 7 women had been killed within a 4-mile radius in abandoned buildings, empty garages, or vacant lots on the east side of Detroit between August 2001 and June 2006. All the women were black and were sex workers or had a history of drug abuse or both. All were between the ages of 30 and 53, except, of course, Jane Doe's age wasn't known at the time. All exhibited some blunt force trauma to the head, and identified objects used to bludgeon the victims ranged from a brick, a cement block, a chair leg, and a garage door handle. The women were all nude and spread-eagled with some items of clothing draped over them. Now you see why I stated the woman who survived was very lucky to be alive. It was time to question the man arrested for the attack on her, which resembled the 7 murders in every way, except that in her case, she survived.
A mochi moment from Tara, who writes, "For years, all my doctor said was eat less and move more, which never worked. But you know what does? The simple eating tips from my nutritionist at Mochi. And after losing over 30 pounds, I can say you're not just another GLP-1 source. You're a life source. Thanks, Tara. I'm Myra Ahmed, founder of Mochi Health. To find your Mochi moment, visit joinmochi.com.
Tara is a Mochi member compensated for her story.
In the shadows and flames, primals will fall, and from the blood and ash, new gods will rise. Poppy was never meant to awaken, and consequences are devastating, stirring ancient powers from their slumber, transforming Castile and Kirin in ways the fates couldn't foresee. The great conspirator has returned to stop the primal of death. The gods have awakened, harboring blood-soaked secrets, and every choice can undo everything. The Primal of Blood and Bone, perfect for fans of Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros. Available September 23rd. Pre-order today.
Hey, it's Brian Christopher. Ready to chill this summer? You're in luck. I'm hanging out at Chumba Casino, and you're in for a treat. Chillax with hundreds of games, daily bonuses, exciting spins, and epic prizes. It's all here, always free to play. Kick back, have fun, and head to ChumbaCasino.com. Let's make this summer legendary.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T&Cs. 21+.
In custody for the attack on the surviving woman, Shelly Brooks was read his rights and agreed to waive them and speak with police. He ended up being questioned multiple times, as there was a lot to cover. All in all, Brooks made 10 statements to police, confessing in detail to the 7 murders I just discussed. Brooks confessed to killing Pam Grier, on whom his DNA had been located. He also provided some details on some of the other murders. He said that he had hired Sandra Davis for sex work, and they met in the same abandoned building on St. Paul where he later killed Pam. He and Sandra argued over payment, and he struck her in the head repeatedly when she tried to leave. Marion Woods Daniels had tried to run off with his money, so he hit her on the head with a brick in a Crane Street alley. It was pretty much the same story with Thelma Johnson, whom he admitted hitting on the head a couple of times. With Melissa Toston, Brooks said he killed her in a vacant garage on Flanders by hitting her with a cement block, and he cut his hand while doing it. He also admitted that he rifled her purse searching for money. And finally, Jane Doe. He wanted to get his money back from her, so he choked her to death and took it, leaving her body in the vacant home on Harding Street. The confessions were frank, matter-of-fact, and emotionally detached. Detroit police officer Mike Carlisle, a homicide investigator who worked the serial killings, said in an article in the Detroit Free Press about Brooks's owning up to the murders, quote, "He never cried, he never showed remorse." For all these murders, Brooks was initially charged with 7 counts of premeditated murder and 7 counts of felony murder. But police suspected him in as many as 14 deaths in the city since 1999, according to NBC News. But prosecutors decided to first pursue the cases in which they had DNA evidence. According to court documents, Brooks's DNA ended up being found on the bodies or belongings of 3 of the 7 women whose murders he confessed to, including Pam Grier, whose murder, being linked to Brooks, had started the whole thing. Prior to his first trial for Pam's slaying in 2002, Brooks tried to get his confession thrown out. He testified in an evidentiary hearing before Wayne County Circuit Judge Vonda Evans that Detroit police officers threw him against a wall and threatened him with violence unless he confessed to the 7 murders. Judge Evans was not swayed, and the confessions were allowed in at trial. On March 7, 2007, Brooks was found guilty of first-degree murder for the slaying of Pam Grier. The jury deliberated for 10 hours before rendering its verdict. The following week, he was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Rhonda Miles. Brooks's DNA was found on the chair leg he had used to kill her. The survivor who had been put into a coma by Brooks's attack testified against him. She said that he had his hands around her throat and, quote, "I knew I was going to die." He then bashed her in the head with a brick. Per an article in the Detroit Free Press, Wayne County jurors took only 30 minutes to convict Brooks of this second murder. Quote, Assistant Wayne County Prosecutor Robert Moran said DNA evidence and a confession from Brooks gave prosecutors a strong case. That's one of the quickest verdicts I've ever had, said Moran, who has been prosecuting for 13 years. Brooks is charged with first-degree murder in the killings of 5 other prostitutes and the rape of a surviving woman. We'll probably come back and make a decision on which other cases to try after he's sentenced, Moran said, end quote. At his sentencing on March 29th, Brooks was sentenced by Judge Evans to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole pursuant to Michigan law. He was also sentenced to 25 to 50 years for the attack on the surviving sex worker, for which he was charged with assault with intent to commit murder and criminal sexual conduct in the first degree. So in the end, Shelly Brooks is documented as having confessed to 7 murders, but was convicted of only 2. And Detroit police believe he is responsible for more slayings, and that he is perhaps the most prolific serial killer in Detroit history. But after they locked Brooks up for life, the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office decided not to expend any more resources prosecuting him further, a practical decision that can nonetheless seem unfair to the families of those victims who did not get justice. Unsurprisingly, Brooks did exercise his right to appeal. On appeal of his convictions, he tried to oppose the introduction of similar act evidence. In other words, he disputed that prosecutors in his trials should have been allowed to introduce similar act evidence that he had killed other women the same way, because it was prejudicial, he claimed. As the Michigan Court of Appeals ruled in one of the cases, quote, because the evidence that defendant struck 6 other prostitutes in the head after engaging in sex and having a dispute over payment makes it more likely that he killed the victim in the instant case by hitting her in the head after engaging in sex and having a dispute over payment, we therefore conclude that the evidence regarding the 6 other women was relevant, end quote. The convictions would stand. Shelly Andre Brooks remains in prison at Michigan's Kinross Correctional Facility to this day. In every updated mugshot I've seen, he looks just as happy as if he was being taken to Disney World.
In the shadows and flames, primals will fall, and from the blood and ash, new gods will rise. Poppy was never meant to awaken, and consequences are devastating, stirring ancient powers from their slumber, transforming Castile and Kirin in ways the fates couldn't foresee. The great conspirator has returned to stop the primal of death. The gods have awakened, harboring blood-soaked secrets, and every choice can undo everything. The primal of blood and bone, perfect for fans of Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros. Available September 23rd. Pre-order today.
Homes.com has collaboration tools to help home shoppers search, share, and discuss home shopping with family, friends, and their agent directly through the site. Though it was fun to get that email from your husband about that 3-bedroom in the hills, to which you replied via text that you would never live in the hills and you'd like to find a 3-bedroom closer to the beach. To which he replied, why are you so uncompromising? A fun way to spend an afternoon, but we think it's just a tad bit easier our way. Homes.com. Ding dong. We've done your homework.
Hey, it's Brian Christopher. Ready to chill this summer? You're in luck. I'm hanging out at Chumba Casino, and you're in for a treat. Chillax with hundreds of games, daily bonuses, exciting spins, and epic prizes. It's all here, always free to play. Kick back, have fun, and head to ChumbaCasino.com. Let's make this summer legendary.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T&Cs. 21+.
What do we know about Brooks? Shelly Andre Brooks was born on January 22, 1969 in Detroit, but was raised in Ann Arbor. His father was not involved in his life, and his mother abandoned him when he was a young child, leaving him to live with his grandmother. The body of our Jane Doe was found on Harding Street, just 1,000 feet from Brooks's grandmother's home. From that point on, Brooks resented his mother, and his anger at her has been interpreted as the possible cause of his hatred of and violent tendencies toward women. This from NBC News, quote, Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy said authorities believe Brooks's difficult childhood may help explain the motives in the killings. She said Brooks's mother, who is no longer alive, was a drug addict and that he was abused as a child. He was really killing his mother all over again, Worthy said, end quote. Brooks was assessed at below average intelligence and dropped out of school before his junior year. He held a series of menial jobs in restaurants and laundromats, and had some law enforcement contact, being ticketed for trespassing in a vacant building, and even serving 60 days for possession of a concealed firearm. In the mid-90s, he became homeless, living on the streets and sometimes crashing in his cousin's basement, until he was arrested at age 37. At that time, he stood 6'4" and weighed 290 pounds. When Brooks was first arrested in 2006, a reporter went to an address listed for his family. A brother-in-law of Brooks answered the door, and when asked about the allegations that Brooks was a serial killer, said Brooks, quote, wasn't like that. He also asked for privacy, saying that the stress on the family resulting from the arrest and charges had led to Brooks's mom being hospitalized. She later died. I'd like to point out that in 2009, Michigan authorities found a trove of 11,000 untested rape kits that had been stored and forgotten in a DPD storage facility. Yep, 11,000 rape kits that no one ever bothered to test. Mind blown. Anyway, apparently one of those kits linked back to Shelly Brooks. I don't even know who the victim was, but it sounds like the rape predated the 7 known murders. Wayne County prosecutor Kim Worthy told the media, quote, "Had that rape kit been analyzed, had it not been forgotten on a shelf, perhaps those women would still be alive," end quote. Now that is a horrifying thought, that all of this tragedy could possibly have been prevented. Okay, enough about Brooks. Let's get back to our Jane Doe. Sometime in the 2011 to 2013 timeframe, Jane Doe's case details were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System known as NamUs. She was UP 7935. A forensic composite reconstruction of her facial features was created by forensic artist Sarah Krebs, and this very lifelike image was released to the public in hopes that it would assist with her identification. But it didn't. Her case went cold for years until the advent of Operation United. This 2019 program was the brainchild of DPD Sergeant Shannon Jones, an investigator in the homicide unit charged with investigating missing persons. By extension, Sergeant Jones's role includes identifying John and Jane Does, of which there were many under the purview of the DPD. Operation United stands for Unknown Names Identified Through Exhumation and DNA. As you might guess, the goal of Operation United is to identify John and Jane Does through obtaining their DNA and using it to locate family members. Sergeant Jones told me that her agency undertook the exhumation of about 220 bodies to obtain DNA for identification purposes. Once the DNA was obtained, the Does were entered into NamUs if they weren't already in there, and as part of that, their DNA was uploaded into CODIS's Unidentified Human Remains database for comparison against family reference samples submitted to the database by family members looking for their missing loved ones. Sergeant Jones told me that her agency had identified several Does through these CODIS matchups, but they had not identified Shelly Brooks' homicide victim, Jane Doe. In April of 2022, the DPD sent a sample collected at Jane Doe's autopsy to Othram Labs for SNP analysis. Using funds provided by NamUs pursuant to a Department of Justice grant, Othram was able to generate a SNP profile from the remains and undertook an IgG investigation. I don't have any details on this, but I was told that after building out the family trees, Othram recommended to the agency that they obtain a reference sample from a male who they believed might be a sibling to Jane Doe. So Sergeant Jones contacted this man and asked if he had a missing, close female relative. He did, he said, his sister Darylnn. Darylnn had gone missing in the mid-2000s, and after the family heard about the serial killer, Shelly Brooks, who preyed on drug-addicted black women in their 30s and 40s, they worried that Darylnn could have been one of his victims. Well, she was. DNA from the man confirmed that he was a full sibling to Jane Doe, and DNA from another woman confirmed that she was also a sibling to Jane Doe. Jane Doe was Darylnn Washington. Darylnn was born on June 15, 1959, and was a Michigan native. Unfortunately, this is one of those rare cases in which I know way more about the killer than his victim, which I hate. But the sad fact is that we have barely any information on Darylnn. She was a drug addict and seemed to have experience with life on the streets of Detroit, in particular, the Indian Village area. She was killed by Shelly Brooks, whom she almost certainly met on the street, at age 47. Her family did not file a missing persons report for her, and they declined to speak with me for this podcast. Heartbreakingly, I could not locate any news articles about her, other than in the context of a Shelly Brooks victim. But at least now, even though Brooks didn't know her name, we all do, thanks to the hard work and dedication of the Detroit PD. It's Darylnn Washington. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. Before you leave, please let me tell you about some important things related to the show. If you'd like to support this podcast, and in the process, get access to early and ad-free episodes, as well as bonus content like crime scene photos, you can sign up for a Patreon subscription for only $5 a month by heading over to patreon.com/DNAID. Of course, you're welcome to contribute more than $5 a month. We rely on Patreon funds to pay for the original source materials I use to research each episode. If Patreon isn't your thing, you can also show your support with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts. It costs just $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. Your AbJack Insider subscription will give you the same benefits for not only DNA ID, but for all of the shows on the AbJack network, like Killer Communications and Campus Killings. Head over to Apple Podcasts and find the DNA ID page or look for the AbJack network to get started. If you're on social media, we'd love to interact with you there. DNA ID is on every major social media platform. Search your favorite platforms for DNA ID Podcast to find us. We also have a YouTube channel, and our website is dnaidpodcast.com. You can find links to all of these anytime in our show notes. If you need to reach the show, contact us by emailing dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Finally, if you want to pick up some fun DNA ID merch and represent the show, visit the store at www.customizedgirl.com/s/DNA ID podcast. DNA ID is researched, written, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt.